Hello Ignition Radio listeners and welcome to Airtime of the Geek. It's Monday and it's 1pm GMT if you're listening via our website or via TuneIn. If you're listening to the 1am repeat, it's 5pm Pacific, 7pm Central and 8pm Eastern. Comments, queries, suggestions, you can follow me at Airtime Geek on Twitter or on Instagram I am at Airtime of the Geek. My email address is currently not functioning, so you can't get in touch with me that way, but if you go to our website, you can contact me on info@teessidecommunitymedia.org.uk. Today is the 29th of February, which means not only is it a leap day, but it's only 55 days until Game of Thrones Season 6 airs. Once again, I asked my friends if they had any requests, and I was told by Robin to talk about him again. And also to play Reach for the Stars. Brave Sir Robin is my number one fan. He's been so lovely and supportive, and I honestly can't thank him enough for all the cheerleading he's done for me. So, just for you, here's Reach for the Stars. Other requests from my friends. Lee wanted me to talk about pandas. I really racked my brains trying to figure out what I could say about these fuzzy wuzzy bears, which are seemingly made of adorable. I thought I could talk perhaps about the Pandaren race in World of Warcraft, or I could talk about Kung Fu Panda. But the only panda I ever really cared about in my pop culture life is Sexual Harassment Panda.
Sexual harassment. Panda who explains sexual harassment to you and me. Sexual harassment. Panda, don't say that, don't touch there, don't be nasty, says the silly bear. He's gonna tell you what's right and wrong. Sexual harassment, Panda.
This is a character from South Park who only really appeared in one episode from Season 3, way back in 1999. It's a great episode, but it's one that the South Park creators, Matt Stone and Trey Parker, couldn't actually remember making because they were too hungover from making South Park the movie.
Makes me a sad panda.
Though it was only a single appearance, it's still a character that's really quoted today, and I think it's the early episodes really referenceable and really quotable, and that's why fans still sort of talk about it now. And I think that's fulfilled my obligation to talk about pandas. Me and the bestie were talking about in-jokes on Friday and how we need a word for when we in-joke in front of others. Is there a word for that? Because it's pretty embarrassing when we do it. In Geek news, the showrunner for the 2017 new series of Star Trek has been announced, and it's Brian All My Fantastic Shows Get Cancelled Fuller, who has added Wrath of Khan writer Nicholas Myers to the writing staff too. Brian Fuller, who created TV masterpieces Dead Like Me, Pushing Daisies and Hannibal, so I imagine that this will be the greatest Star Trek ever, even better than Deep Space Nine, and it'll last about 12 episodes. In fantastic news, that Netflix Punisher series that was rumoured isn't going to be happening. Thank Odin. The Punisher is a comic I've always hated and only was ever vaguely interested in the film version starring Dolph Lundgren because he's a giant Swedish dreamboat, or at least when he was younger. And I think I probably watched He-Man a few too many times when I was a kid. The ever-expanding Marvel Cinematic Universe is adding 2 new shows which have been confirmed, however. Marvel's Most Wanted, which will star Agents of S.H.I.E.L.'s characters Bobby, aka Mockingbird, and Hunter. Now, Hunter is a historically interesting character. In the 616 universe, he's the founder of MI13, the organisation that Captain Britain works for. And I keep hoping that Captain Britain and Spitfire and Captain Midlands will work their way into the MCU. So I'm kind of hoping that will happen in Most Wanted. Well, I can dream. And the other series is Damage Control. It's based on the book of the same name, and it'll be about the cleanup crew who goes around cleaning up after superheroes. It's really, really funny, and I highly recommend you check out the book before the series comes out. As a lifelong comic book reader, I'm so happy right now that things are so successful, but there's just so many shows to watch at once. I've got S.H.I.E.L.D., I've got Agent Carter, Daredevil, Jessica Jones. I mean, thankfully I can binge watch those two on Netflix. But then like DC has an incredible group of shows right now with Arrow, The Flash, Supergirl, Legends of Tomorrow and Vixen all being in the same universe, and I'm beginning to wonder when I'll have the time to sleep. In terrible news, after I played every little piece from Pete's Dragon last week, I found out that there's a remake in the works. Actually, there's a trailer out. So it's pretty much done. And Elliot looked all CGI realistic, so I don't think there'll be any razzle-dazzling in this version. There's also going to be a reboot of Friday the 13th. Again. Listen, guys, the first Friday the 13th movie was really interesting because, spoilers for a movie older than me, no one saw the little old lady becoming the serial killer. So you're planning on starting again, but with Jason. Again, like you did in the first remake. The Friday sequels weren't great, but they reached a sort of perfection with Jason X when they'd fully embraced the whole, we know you're just watching Jason kill people in funny ways without having to go over and over why he comes back from the dead. Just do that. Freddy was his best when he was making funny quips and the audience could root for him, and Jason was his best when he had an assortment of people to kill in amusing ways. Seriously, just do that. Nobody wants a gritty reboot of an undead immortal zombie killing machine with mummy issues. We just want the over-the-top killings. And pretty much the same goes for the other Nightmare on Elm Street reboot that's also in the works. In meh news, there's going to be a TV adaptation of Cruel Intentions, and Sarah Michelle Gellar signed up straight away. She's probably still crying into a non-fat yogurt after Joss Whedon didn't call her instantly when she wouldn't stop mentioning her desire for a new Buffy project because he's too busy being the supreme overlord of the Marvel Universe. And she's wanted nothing to do with Buffy for years, until she's suddenly got no money and her career is in the toilet. So a continuation of a movie which ended with one of the main characters dying, another stealing his car, and the third being slut-shamed, is going to receive a continuation. Hashtag nobody cares. In other meh news, J.K. Rowling still isn't the richest woman in the universe, and the franchise that was thoroughly murdered with Deathly Hallows zombie shambles its way on. Fantastic Beasts and Where to Find Them is still happening, apparently. The world still continues to not care, and no doubt the adventures of Albus Severus Potter, son of the worst child number in the universe, will no doubt be happening eventually. So I'm going to play a little interesting track I found on the internet this week. It's the Imperial March from Star Wars, played in a major key. And then when we come back, we'll be doing this week's Top 10. For this week's Top 10, I'm counting down my Top 10 cartoon theme tunes. When I was a kid, cartoon theme tunes told you the plot of the show. There weren't repeats, we only had 4 channels, and only one-off families could really afford a video recorder and a blank video. Buying those, I remember as a kid saving up pocket money to buy a spare 4-hour blank video, and that would set me back most of my pocket money. If you missed a few episodes, it was tough. So you had to be able to drop in and out of the show with missing a few episodes here and there. And that meant that theme tunes were a really good way of telling kids what the show was about, even if they weren't avid watchers. My choices for my top 10 theme tunes are largely from cartoons from the 1980s when I was a kid. I was surprised actually when I was researching this to find out how old some of the shows were. It shouldn't have been a surprise because the UK gets something late. Well, everything late. Especially films and TV shows. Some of them weren't actually aired here until 5 or 6 years after the show finished airing in the US. These were dark, pre-internet days, so if it wasn't shown on the BBC's Broom Cupboard or the Channel 3 Kids Show or the Channel 4 morning show on a Sunday, I think it was, used to show cartoons, but it wasn't like a hosted kids show. We just had no way of knowing that it even existed. And this was really, really hard trying to narrow down just 10, especially after I discussed it with my bestie, and he reminded me of about 15 other theme tunes I hadn't even thought of. But I did eventually manage to cut down the list, and I like to do them in reverse order because it's more fun for me. And with that in mind, we're starting at number 10, which is Disney's Adventures of the Gummy Bears. Original run 1985 to 1991. Starring veteran voice actors Corey Burton as Gruffy, Jim Cummings as Zummy, and my personal favourite voice actor, the man who voiced my childhood, Rob Paulson, who played the late edition The Mad Artist Gusto. I mean, Gummy Bears wasn't a particularly original concept. It was good versus affably evil with cute little animals, and that does mean that it was perhaps generic, but it was still a good show. It was a great show. The incredibly catchy, cheery theme tune, I think, really contributed to its ongoing legacy and fond memories that people have of it today. It's a cartoon that's aged really well, and I think it helps that it's set in a historical time period, and I think kids today would probably still enjoy watching it. And during my list rewatch, I enjoyed watching it, and I do normally admit when a beloved childhood thing has aged horribly. See Ferngully. Gummy Bears was one of the only 2 Disney afternoon lineup shows that weren't based on existing properties. The other one was Gargoyles, which was a fantastic series, and it had a really richly plotted show and half the cast of Star Trek The Next Generation. And it did have a good theme tune, but Gummy Bears theme tune is on another level. When you hear the guy giving it his all, screaming Gummy Bears into the microphone, you can't help but love it. Number 9 is the Teenage Mutant Hero Turtles. Original run 1987 to 1996. Yes, the Hero Turtles, not the Ninja Turtles. If you grew up in the UK like me, then you'd know that the 1980s we were still suffering under the mad censorship laws that had seen the video nasties and the bannings, and the Turtles were one of the knock-on effects of this. It was censored in a lot of ways. Things were reanimated. Words were cut, and the show was renamed from the Ninja Turtles to the Hero Turtles, and it was this version that was shown not just in the UK, but most of Europe as well. Apparently, the government thought that seeing nunchucks was a step too far. So they were replaced with the animation of a grappling hook, wherever they actually could, and they removed phrases like, let's kick some shell, and bummer, because at the time it was primarily used as a slang word for a gay man, and the government made a lot of questionable decisions in the 80s. Also, anything with the word ninja in it was automatically rated an 18 certificate, meaning nobody under the age of 18 could see anything with the word ninja in it. I actually didn't hear the original ninja version of the theme tune until I was in my 20s, thank the internet. And to this day, I still prefer the Hero version. The song's just better for a start. It's sung better. The recording's cleaner. The harmonies are just better. Though the Turtles debuted in America in 1987, we didn't get them till later because this is the UK. And even though it was ridiculously popular, and I remember it turning pizza into a really popular food. It existed, but people talked about it more, or you at least noticed people talking about it more. And like my local supermarket started selling Turtles branded sweet pizzas that were like a sweet pastry with chocolate and marshmallows on top, and you were supposed to put these in the oven and warm them up a little bit. So I suppose it would be like a British s'more. Not that I've tried a s'more, but I imagine that that's what it would be like. And they had merchandise and everything. We didn't have a car when I was a kid, but my dad, bless him, went round all the petrol stations trying to get me the full set of collector's coins. And I had turtle mugs and piggy banks and action figures, and my friend, my bestie, always complained to his parents because he really, really wanted an April O'Neil doll to go with the action figures that he had for all the other characters, and he only recently just managed to get his hands on an original Krang, and his parents wouldn't buy him the April O'Neil because it was a girl's toy. Well, he was gay anyway, so joke's on them. The thing was, in the UK, we actually only got to see the first few seasons. They only showed reruns after that, and only a couple of episodes were released on video. I remember The Simpsons started to take off a bit at the time. They stopped showing new episodes. But The Simpsons were only shown on Sky, and it wasn't a common household luxury until the late 90s, so I never quite understood why that happened. But yeah, the Turtles kept running from 87 to 96, and we basically just got the stuff up to about 1990 in the UK, and after that there was nothing new. The Turtles starred voice actors Tony Jay, James Avery, aka Uncle Phil from The Fresh Prince, who is sadly no longer with us, and my personal favourite voice actor, Rob Paulsen, who voiced my favourite character, Raphael, which is why I can't watch the new show, not at all, because Rob Paulsen is voicing Leonardo, and my brain cannot handle the weirdness of that. So here is the Teenage Mutant Hero Turtles. Number 8 is The Amazing Spider-Man original run, 1967 to 1970. This is the oldest show on my list, first being produced so long before I was born. My mother was actually just a toddler when it was first shown on TV. Ralph Bakshi, who is a rotoscoping legend, he made the animated Lord of the Rings movie and also the maker of one of the worst movies I've ever seen in my life, Cool World, story for another day. Was responsible for this low-budget cartoon, which was very much in the spirit of the Adam West Batman series, and it was actually a satire of superheroes as much as it was a celebration of them. The theme tune made my list, not just because I love it, because I do, and because it sparked my love of superheroes, but it still endures today. It's still recognisable as the Spider-Man theme tune, years after it ceased being a TV show. Today, versions of the new cartoons and movies mostly use updates of the original theme tune, and so I think that's earned a firm place on my list. Number 7 is Bucky O'Hare and the Toad Wars. Its original run was just 1991. This is the youngest show on my list and also the shortest lived, with only 13 episodes produced, though it was actually first aired on the BBC, so we actually did get it at the time it was released. It was cut tragically short before its time. Bucky O'Hare had the makings of a really ballsy, epic show, and they did something which is fairly rare in Western animation, particularly children's Western animation. In the first episode, they killed off a main character. This is fairly unheard of. I can only think of half a dozen shows that ever did this, and when it was done, sometimes it was very unclear, and while it can occur in a family show or an adult show like The Simpsons or South Park, shows aimed at kids, it hardly ever happens. And perhaps the world wasn't ready for a green space rabbit fighting toads, but Bucky O'Hare did leave us with a great theme tune. If you can find a copy, legally, of course, a legal copy of Bucky O'Hare, I highly recommend it. Like I say, it's only 13 episodes long, but it's a really great show. And I'm playing you the theme tune. Number 6, and from this point on, I really struggled trying to give them some sort of order. Because not only are they really great theme tunes, but some of these were my favourite cartoons when I was growing up, and I had to separate my nostalgia for the cartoon and how good I actually thought that the theme tune was. So number 6 is Brave Star, original run 1987 to 1989. It's actually one of my favourite cartoons of all time. Of course, the original one was shown later in the UK, and like many a classic sci-fi, Brave Star mashes up cowboys in space, but throws in some mystic magic and a mechanical talking horse for good measure. Every time I hear the theme tune for Brave Star, it gets completely stuck in my head for hours, sometimes just thinking about it. The theme tune tells you the story of the show, like every good theme tune. Eventually, the show gave the full backstory to explain how Marshall Bravestar had come to be, but for the most part, the theme tune tells you everything you need to know. Bravestar Eyes of a Hawk, Ears of a Wolf, Brave Star, Strength of a Bear, Speed of a Puma, Ears of a Puma, Speed of a Puma.
A man, he flies like a moron. Dun, dun, dun. He has the power to rear project major cities.
Brave Star was created because the main villain had been drawn as a potential villain for another cartoon show, and the producer had seen it and wanted a cartoon written where he was going to be the main bad guy. It was the last cartoon produced by Filmation. The company was bought out by L'Oreal, the shampoo people, who closed the animation studio down because apparently their mission in life is to crush children's happiness and make ridiculously expensive hair soap. Brave Star wasn't a show that messed about. A lot of shows at the time were doing PSAs on drugs because the American government offered incentives to any shows that did anti-drug episodes. And they did one called The Price, which was about a drug taking over the miners of New Texas, and it was getting them addicted, and eventually a young boy dies of an overdose. And like most of the shows at the time, doing a drugs episode would have some sort of path to salvation, or the drug wouldn't be that serious. I mean, Jessie and her caffeine pills. Or it would be an adult. But the show dealt with the horrific and real consequences to drug abuse and the fact that it could even happen to kids. They didn't pull the punches. There was a kid lying dead on the floor, and at the end of the episode, Marshall Bravestar is standing over his grave telling you this is what happens when you mess about with drugs. So here's the opening to Bravestar. Number 5. We're entering my top 5 now, and again, this is so hard trying to choose an order. But eventually I went with Jace and the Wheeled Warriors. Original run was 1985 to 1986. There's a guy that some sci-fi fans might have heard of. He wrote stories for comic books like Amazing Spider-Man, Thor, Superman, Wonder Woman. He worked on several cartoons, He-Man, She-Ra, The Real Ghostbusters, which was the cartoon version of the Ghostbusters, because they couldn't actually use Ghostbusters because there was another cartoon called that and it was very confusing. And a few live action shows like Walker, Texas Ranger, Murder, She Wrote, and a little sci-fi show known as Babylon 5, which made a paltry 110 episodes, 6 TV movies and a spin-off show. The man is J. Michael Straczynski, and the show he developed is, of course, Jason the Wheeled Warriors. Straczynski is a holy word in sci-fi circles, held with reverence along the likes of Roddenberry and Asimov. He's not a fan of dumbing things down and likes producing long story arcs, and just because it was going to be for children didn't mean that was going to be any different. Jace's 65-episode run had a very in-depth ongoing plot, and it wasn't resolved at the time of its cancellation. It featured 2 dueling forces. The heroes are humans called the Lightning League, and the villains were organic plants called the Monster Mines, and of course there was a toy line to go along with it because it was the 80s and that's how we made cartoons then. It was actually really epic, and it's really worth looking up. If you haven't heard how good the theme tune is, you're gonna hear it now. Number 4 is Mysterious Cities of Gold. The original run was 1982 to 1983. When this show began airing, I hadn't been born yet, so it would have been a bit difficult for me to watch when I'd yet to exist. But I caught it on later reruns, and whenever it was on I would sit enthralled, as it had a long-running storyline, and many years later when I was able to buy the full run on DVD, I sat and I binge-watched it from start to end. I didn't even leave my room, and it's aged really well. At the end of each episode, I'd forgotten about this until I rewatched it on DVD, but at the end of each episode, they would show like a little bit of history, live-action filming of like the Aztec temples and where the actual like the hunt for El Dorado would take place, and they'd give you some information. And it was educational but interesting. It was edutainment. In 2012, they actually made a sequel, which was a direct follow-on from the show 30 years after the original. And it picked up where the original left off. The theme tune was a reworking of the original theme tune. It wasn't as good. But it had all the same adventure, all the same humour. It was fantastic. Originally, actually, the show had 2 theme tunes, like many shows in the 80s. There was a separate intro theme tune to the outro theme tune. And actually, it's the outro, which I'm going to be playing today. This is a piece of music I just love. I have sat with it just on repeat for hours, playing it over and over and over again. It's a fantastic piece of music, and here it is. Number 3 is Ulysses 31. Original run was 1981 to 1982. Again, this was a show that was shown on TV before I had yet to come into existence, but luckily it was repeated a lot when I was a kid because it was really epic. And also, like Mysterious Cities of Gold, there was an update released in 2012 on a now defunct video site, so you can't actually watch it. There weren't more added than about 4 episodes, but apparently it was meant to be very, very good. The show was about Ulysses, captain of the spaceship, the Odyssey. The show was about Ulysses, the captain of the spaceship, the Odyssey, and his son Telemachus trying to find the kingdom of Hades after annoying the Olympian gods in the 31st century. What can I say? The 80s were a bit odd. It was originally made in Japan, and the soundtrack was designed by Shuki Levy and him, Saban of Saban Entertainment. They scored other productions as well, like for companies that weren't even part of them, like Inspector Gadget, Mysterious Cities of Gold, Mask, He-Man, She-Ra, and of course Saban, the production company who created Super Sentai, known in the West as the Power Rangers. So here is the full theme tune of Ulysses 31. Number 2 is Mask. The original run was 1985 to 1988. Not The Mask, the cartoon version of the Jim Carrey movie, and certainly not Mask, the movie about the poor kid born with the disfiguring bone disease, but Mask, Mobile Armoured Strike Command. Command is not generally spelled with a K, but since the show has been off the air for nearly 30 years, I don't really see the point in whinging about it now. Unlike other shows on this list, I don't actually think that Mask has held up all that well. It was a little bit of a rip-off of G.I. Joe and the Transformers, though one of the characters is actually due to appear in the next G.I. Joe movie, and they were all produced by Hasbro, so I don't actually think it was ever an issue. Hasbro released a slideshow presentation last year which suggested that there was a new animated series or perhaps toy line in development, and if that's true, they can't touch the theme tune. The theme tune is perfect. Hasbro, it's perfect. Don't mess with the theme tune. So, number 1 is DuckTales. Original run was 1987 to 1990. DuckTales was based on the Duck Universe comics created by Carl Banks, and it followed the adventures of Scrooge McDuck and his nephews Huey, Dewey and Louie, who are left in Scrooge's care when Donald Duck joins the Navy. Though Huey, Dewey and Louie were the main characters, and as it went on, it would develop all of the side characters, sometimes focusing on Launchpad McQuack, sometimes focusing on Gyro Gearloose. Disney invested a lot of money in its production, which at the time was seen as really risky, because cartoons were seen as low-budget investments, but it was so successful it paved the way for other Disney shows, like Chip and Dale Rescue Rangers, Tailspin, and Darkwing Duck. And Darkwing Duck was itself a spin-off of DuckTales, as Tailspin was originally intended to be, and it was going to be focusing on Launchpad McQuack, but things would change. It also spawned a few video games and a feature-length movie. Some DuckTales fans will be happy to learn that Disney XD has announced a reboot of the series, which will come to our screens at some point in 2017. However, the entire voice cast is going to be replaced. I sincerely hope, though, that if they are doing this reboot, they're going to keep the original theme tune. I know when I set out to make this list, I said to myself that I shouldn't actually put it at number 1. So many other lists have put it at the number 1 slot, but as I listened to each theme song I was considering, I've slowly realised it had to go at the number 1 slot. So that was my top 10 cartoon theme tunes. Honourable mentions, aka the ones which I desperately wanted to include but couldn't. The Wuzzles, Carmen Sandiego, Galaxy High. Chippendales Rescue Rangers, Tailspin. My Little Pony and Friends, Count Duckula, Raggy Dolls, Thundercats, Moondreamers. And about a billion other songs as well that I just couldn't fit on the list. I'm going to take a little break and I'm going to play a song that I'm currently obsessed with. Elle King's X's and O's. So that was Elle King, X's and O's. And I know we are actually going into the second hour, which normally I just fill up with music, but I had a lot to write about, considering I actually didn't have that much time this week with working a beer festival. I want to talk for a little bit about how awesome the DC TV shows are right now. Arrow was a really slow build, and I'm so over the flashbacks. I stopped caring last season about what Oliver did 5 years, like when he was on the island or wasn't on the island. And I really only care about the present timeline. And that present timeline occasionally needs a kick in its bottom. With the whole will they, won't they, Felicity and Oliver romance. But discounting that, I completely love the show. Damien Dark put John Barrowman to shame with his delightful scenery chewing, and that's not an easy task. We've also got a really cool Black Canary, a female Speedy, yay for diversity, and having some kicking butt females on screen. We've also got Diggleman, who I'm not even used to call Spartan yet. He's still Diggleman to me. That's what I've been calling him since the show started. And together, this team with the Green Arrow, they make a really good crime-fighting team. And I love that the writers took the time that they needed to get the characters to where they are now. Me and my bestie have a long-running joke about Oliver's blog. Whenever Oliver is needlessly moody, we talk about him writing his blog again. And whenever another character does the same thing, it's like, oh no, they've been reading Oliver's blog. We poke fun. Generally, I adore it, but you can poke fun at things you love. Recently, they introduced Calculator in the most awesome way possible. He's a fairly obscure comic book villain whose original incarnation actually involved a man in a giant calculator suit on the same laughable level as Crazy Quilt, a man in brightly coloured clothes, and the Condiment King. Yes, that's a real character, and he was a man who squirted ketchup at people. But in more recent years, has become more of a backstreet crime organiser, that is Calculator. He's snarky and he's a bit like a sort of, well, there's already a crime realtor, but he works sort of back deals and helps organise crime jobs. And I'm hoping that The Flash will introduce Ambush Bug, because The Flash is the perfect show to do that. Ambush Bug is a little bit like the Deadpool of the DC universe in that he's insane and that he knows he's in a comic. And I've recommended it before and I will recommend it again. Buy Ambush Bug. Read Ambush Bug. Love Ambush Bug. The Flash is actually my favourite show on TV right now. They love geekdom, they embrace it, and they reference stuff only geeks will get. And I love them for it. I thought that the season 1 mystery arc of who is the Reverse Flash was really interesting, but the build-up of the Zoom and character and the mystery around him and who he really is has been just as interesting. And his identity was revealed last week, and I won't say anything in case you haven't seen it, but honestly, if you're at all familiar with the comics, it wasn't that much of a surprise. Still, it only took me until a few weeks ago to figure out who it was. largely because I was distracted by Tony Todd's marvellous voice. And when I found out, when I figured out, who it was, I had to make my bestie pause the show so I could lay out my full theory, completely formed all of the ifs, whats, maybes and whys, and it earned me a crisp high five when it was confirmed. We have a tradition with my bestie, and we call it King of the Theory, and there is an actual crown that we made for the person who comes up with the best theory in these kind of mystery act shows. And often we're talking about things like American Horror Story, but superhero shows have mysteries too. And I think I've fully earned the crown by working things out ahead of time, before the mysterious message was tapped out on the glass, and when we're talking about a mystery arc without actually revealing spoilers. Also, that show gave us Mark Hamill basically playing a live action version of his Joker, and any show that does that gets my seal of approval. Then we have Legends of Tomorrow, which features the world's worst Time Lord, Time Master, Booster Gold's son, Rip Hunter. Honestly, every time I watch the show, I get giddy with glee at how much fun I see Dominic Purcell and Wentworth Miller have together as Heatwave and Captain Cold. They're just pure joy, and Brandon Routh is so adorable as Ray Palmer. I'm so glad he got to put on a super suit again. I really enjoyed Superman Returns. I thought he was a great Superman. There was colour and everything. These shows aren't perfect. We do tend to mock Rip Hunter's terrible attempts at time travel, and generally how rapey Hawkman has been with his, Hawkwoman, we were in love 1,000 years ago, that means that automatically I get to have you. I don't like that. But on the whole, it's been really a fun addition, and if Vixen doesn't get her own live action show, I really hope they add her to the cast of Legends, because she was brilliant in that last Arrow episode, and we couldn't stop laughing when Oliver talked about their animated encounter, because we're big geeks. Supergirl is so adorable. I did squee loudly when I saw Helen Slater, the original Supergirl, playing Kara's mother, and Dean Cain, the Superman from Lois and Clark, playing Kara's father. It was a big fangirl squee, and my bestie was like, "Why are you squeeing?" I was like, "It's Dean Cain and Helen Slater." He's like, "Who's Helen Slater?" So that's Supergirl. Peter Fasinelli is a delight on the screen, and the fact that they included Martian Manhunter prompted such squeeze from me and the bestie. We actually had to pause and rewind because we've gotten so excited and screaming and just going, because we're giant nerds. We ended up missing a good chunk of the episode. So I'm going to play a little song before I continue, and I'm going to play the Aha classic known as The Other one-hit wonder that they had, The Sun Always Shines on TV. That was a hard take on me, the lovely Dreamboat Morton Harkett. Right, so back to DC. The brilliant work that's happening right now on DC shows is making up for the terrible, terrible movies. Marvel attacks cinema with making ridiculous amounts of money, by being funny and colourful and slowly building a massive, complicated world with a huge cast of characters and reacting to what fans find awesome and giving them what they want. With Guardians of the Galaxy, they went, "We know you haven't heard of these people, but here's a raccoon with a machine gun and a talking tree. Enjoy." DC kind of takes the attitude of, "We know this is a comic book movie. We're sorry. We're so sorry. We've sapped all the colour and the fun and the no jokes ever. We promise it won't be funny, not even a little bit. We'll make it great. Everything great. You like grey, right?" When I first started reading comics, I was a Marvel zombie, and over the years I added other titles from DC and Image and other houses, and I started my reading list became really varied. And I don't tend to compare which is better in comics, because they offer me different things depending on the title. And generally I wouldn't say one comic house is better than another, except for, the brief madness of the New 52. But I digress. The movies, DC's losing the war. Not in the TV shows. The DC TV shows are epic and awesome, but the movies, snow. I tend to avoid explaining the reasons why I sincerely hate Christopher Nolan and his Batman trilogy. People have asked me, and I avoid it because I get super nerd rage just thinking about it. I love Batman. I fell in love with Adam West when I was a kid, and I loved the Tim Burton movies. I loved the animated series. I love the comics. I hate the Nolan movies. Nolan is a dirty word in my house. Nolan fans tell me they love his movies because they're so realistic. Well, if you want realism from a billionaire who dresses up as a giant bat to fight crime on his downtime, perhaps you don't want to be watching a Batman movie. I mean, these are just boring, generic action films, and anyone in a costume looks stupid and out of place in New York, Chicago, Gotham. Nolan based his trilogy on a Frank Miller book, and Frank Miller wrote one comic book that was kind of okay, but largely overrated, and the rest of the comics he ever wrote were completely terrible. The man is sexist, he's kind of homophobic, he's a pervert, and his contribution to comics was Steve the Angry Hobo, who temporarily broke into the Batcave in order to kidnap small children. He's not the comic genius that Alan Moore was. I mean, okay, Alan Moore is Coco Banana Pants, but he's way better writing comics than Miller ever was. And I hated every single movie that was ever produced on one of his books. Most of the time, not even knowing that he had anything to do with it until I'd already watched the movie. Yes, even Sin City, which is the one Robert Rodriguez film that I've seen that I hate. Throat cancer Batman is how I describe Bale's attempt at the character, partly not his fault. I mean, the suit was really badly designed, apparently, and he couldn't breathe, and that's why he had to sort of hang his mouth open, which looked really stupid. But if Nolan was a decent director, he would have realised how stupid this looks and fixed it. And it sounds so stupid, I can't take him seriously at all, and it gets worse as the films go on. Ra's al Ghul is played by Liam Neeson, an actor who cannot disguise his Irish accent to save his life, and pronounces the character's name wrong all the way through the movie. The character's name is Ra's al Ghul, and it's pronounced in the movie Ra's al Ghul. It's not Ra's al Ghul, it's Ra's al Ghul. And not to mention the fact that Liam Neeson is very, very white. I mean, Bane's only ever been made right when he was made by Paul Dini and Bruce Timm in the animated series. Bane is a Mexican who is fairly intelligent. He's not the very, very white Tom Hardy, nor is he a big dumb brute from the Schumacher movies. But we'll forgive that guy because apparently he died as a young age, leaving 2 small children. And can you imagine Killer Croc in the Nolan verse? It just wouldn't happen. He'd be another white guy with like a really bad case of dermatitis instead of Waylon Jones. The best Joker is Mark Hamill, bar none. I'm not even going to entertain an argument on this one. Then Jack Nicholson, then Cesar Romero. Heath Ledger doesn't even get a spot on my list. His Joker was awful. And that's not to say that he didn't play an interesting character, but the character he played wasn't the Joker. I am down for different interpretations of the character, but the character he was playing lacked all of the nuances that actually make the character of the Joker. The Joker has fun. The Joker sees bats as his frenemy, and he would and has gone after people who have actually tried to kill Batman. Yes, he's crazy. Yes, he kills people, but often when the Joker kills people, there is a reason to it beyond chaos, and the character that Ledger played in The Dark Knight was more like Anarchy, a character who loves chaos and is more of a terrorist. But honestly, the biggest crime in the Nolan films is that The Dark Knight, the world's greatest detective, does less detective work across the 3 movies than Tony Stark does in Iron Man 3. I mean, Tony Stark goes on a mission to find out what happens to Happy. He uses logic and crime scene investigation, and Tony Stark figures things out with his genius brain. The Detective Comics billionaire, supposed genius, does but all detective work throughout 3 movies. I'm going to scrub these terrible movies from my mind by playing the Joker's song from Arkham Knight, which contains massive spoilers, but honestly, if you are an actual Batman fan 17 seconds into the game, you're going to pretty much figure out everything that's going on because you already know the history of the comics. So here it is. Last night were the Oscars, and I was writing this before all of the nominations and all of the winners were announced. I wanted to talk briefly about Leonardo DiCaprio and the movie memes. For many years, he's failed to win the gold statue, and I don't know why it's meme-worthy. He's only been nominated 5 times. His first nomination was for What's Eating Gilbert Grape, and that was a great movie. And he was up for Best Supporting Actor, and lost out to Tommy Lee Jones in The Fugitive, and to be honest, he was up against some other stiff competition too, so it was a worthy loss. His next nomination was for Best Actor, and it was in 2004 for his role in The Aviator, losing out to Jamie Foxx in Ray. And he also was up against actors from Hotel Rwanda, Finding Neverland, and $1 Million Baby. So again, it was a worthy loss. And then the next 2006 nomination was for Blood Diamond, and he lost to Forrest Whitaker, The Last King of Scotland. And to be honest, he really should have lost to Peter O'Toole, who had 8 nominations for Best Actor and never won. Meryl Streep's been nominated 19 times and she's only won 3. 2013 saw the nomination of The Wolf of Wall Street for Best Picture. So that nomination wasn't even for acting, it was just for a producer role. And though 12 Years a Slave, one of those nominated, I actually thought Her was a much better movie. But obviously the winner should have been Thor, The Dark World, because Loki was awesome. So it's not like Leo's really been robbed, especially since most of the people who've seen Revenant think it's not a terrible movie, but it's not Oscar-worthy. And out of the other people who failed to take home the gold statue, I mean, Glenn Close has had 6 nominations, no wins. Richard Burton, 7, no wins. Al Finney, 5 nominations, no wins. But of course, last night, he took home the gold statue at last, and so the meme is dead. But to be honest, I think a lot of fans are saying, well, yes, yeah, he won the Oscar, but it wasn't for a great movie. So did it really deserve the Oscar? That's a question for another time. I'm going to leave you with some music, and Mick and Simon will be starting their show. It's free. Enjoy.